All right, insiders, welcome. It is noon. It is my pleasure. By the way, I'm Justin Rivers, in case we haven't met yet, but I know a bunch of you already. Thank you for joining me. Hope you had a great holiday weekend. It is Tuesday, and it's my great pleasure to welcome Mandy Edgecombe, who will be doing a talk on the remnants of Dutch New Amsterdam. Also, as I am introing Mandy, and as Mandy is introing herself, one of our favorite things to do is please let us know where you're joining from. We have been really happy to see insiders from all over the world now, not just the country, come and join these talks. So would love to know where you're coming from. You can put that in the chat. Also, as Mandy is presenting, please feel free to put any questions that you have for Mandy in the chat, and we will get to them during the Q&A at the end. All right, so what I'm going to do is put this screen down. I am going to turn it over to Mandy. Mandy, are you there?
Hi everyone.
So Mandy is going to take it away. Just a quick little story about Mandy. Mandy is one of our star tour guides for Untapped New York. She was one of the first tour guides I had ever trained back in the day, years ago when we started doing this. And every time I turned a tour over to Mandy, I knew it was in excellent hands. And originally, Remnants of Dutch New Amsterdam was a tour I created, then Mandy took it and made it 1,000 times better. So, Mandy, go for it.
Hi.
It's all you in a bag of chips. So I will see you guys later at the end. And as Mandy, as you're going, we've got Paris, France. We've got Chicago, Middle Village, Queens. They're coming in from all around to see you today. Boston, Cork, Ireland.
What should I say for Boston? That's wicked awesome.
Wicked awesome.
Should I say that?
And Aurora, Colorado, Washington State. So Mandy, you've got a really great audience. Go for it. All you.
So hi, insiders. I'm not sure if there's any of you on here that I've met before on tour. If so, I miss you very much. And if not, I'm so happy to meet all of you here and perhaps out in the actual field in the future. One thing I would also like you, or all of us would like you to put in the comments, is if you have any ancestry. If you have Dutch ancestry, I'd love to know those people's names or whatever you happen to know about them. If anyone has any questions towards the end, maybe about searching for their ancestors' graves, that's something that I could definitely help you with. If anybody is on here from the New Netherlands Settlers Facebook page or any other similar ones, please let us know too. I'd love to see if you guys are here as well. So now, Justin, I should be sharing my screen.
Yes, Mandy, go ahead. Just share your screen at the bottom. It should come up and then put it in presentation mode. And you should be good to go.
All right. So. All right.
Perfect. Go for it.
So Justin did introduce me. Obviously, a little more background on myself, but on behalf of Untapped New York, welcome. I used to be a park ranger at the Statue of Liberty and Ellis Island and Governor's Island. Most recently, I was a docent at the South Street Seaport Museum, not only being a tour guide for Untapped New York. So I've dealt with a lot of essentially where New Amsterdam was is kind of where I hang out and teach a lot of my history. And this is one of my specialties of expertise, probably the main one. I do a lot of research and I can't wait to share it with you. Where I'm going to be talking a lot. I'll probably have to be stopped towards the end. And I guarantee you there's topics within New Amsterdam that I might even miss because I'm talking about a lot of other things. So if you want to email me, I'll have a page towards the end where, if you want more information about oysters or any other type of topic like that, please let me know. So we're going to get started. We're going to get started in 1741. And in 1741 was Caesar's rebellion. Now you're like, why is she starting then, right? Because the colony of New Amsterdam truly kind of existed from like 1625 to about 1664. So it was a complete almost 40 years. before the English ended up taking over in 1664 in August. And so here's why I'm talking about this. It's all about the records. In 1741, there was a slave revolt in New York Colony. Fort George, which used to be called Fort Amsterdam, we're going to get into all that, caught fire. And a secretary in that fort was smart enough to throw all of those records out a window. And those records were blowing in the wind. Some papers went into the harbor. But those records were of the early English colonial days and all of the Dutch colonial days. And I don't want to say all because they actually were records only from 1638 to 1664, and we'll talk about why that was. So these records were saved. Okay. Now we're going to fast forward into the mid 1700s. There was a royal governor who decided to kind of change municipal situations from New York to Boston. All these records got taken to Boston on the Post Road, just kind of, carriage on mud and rocky roads and stuff like that. So a lot of them got lost there. Those records ended up coming back to New York from Boston on the Post Road. And they came back, and then around 1775, a royal governor named William Tryon was, he was doing some bad stuff, and a lot of his constituents didn't like him, and they basically wanted to kill him. He had to hide out on the Halifax, which was a British sloop of war in the harbor, and he took all of those records with him, all the Dutch records. So today, the records that Dr. Charlie Gehring of the New Netherland Institute, that has been translating them for over 30 years, 40 years, they still have little pieces of, little discolorations from the mold, from all of the moisture from being on that ship. So the records, had been kept much safer. They made their way to the New York State Library in Albany eventually in the 1800s, and then comes the job of translating them. So there was an attempt at translating them in the early 1800s, and it was done really badly. And so those couldn't really be depended on. And then we get to 1821 in Amsterdam. That's when the Dutch West India Company sold all of their records for scrap, all of them. Before that happened, though, some things were sold off to collectors. Some of those things we have today are the only documents that we actually have from about 1625 to 1638. And so we're going to get to that right now. Actually, I'm going to skip that one slide for just a second. This is a very important document. This is the birth certificate of Manhattan. It is not the deed. The deed was lost, but we do know that the deed existed because it was written about in 1670. So this document is up in the houses framed of Justin Rivers and Mandy Edgecombe. It's a beautiful document. Now, this thing was written in Amsterdam. This was written in Amsterdam when one of the first ships with a lot of goods, including many, many furs. The fur trade was why the Dutch were here and set up this colony. This is essentially just a list that Peter Shagan wrote down when the boat got back to Amsterdam. Hey, what's on the boat? Hey, how things are, doing in the colony. Well, some women have born some children. The colony size is about 11 morgens, which is a similar measurement to an acre. We paid 60 guilders for the island, which is not necessarily true. And we have a bunch of beaver and otter skins and things like that. So that's this document is so incredibly important, but it wasn't even written here. It was just about some of the goods that were brought. So let me go back to this first slide, and we're going to kind of talk about this stuff as we go along. This is my first time too, by the way, just FYI. This slide is very important. So this is what the island of Manhattan would look like in 1524, before any kind of settlement. I want everybody to think about something. This is just really thought-provoking. What if the United States was settled in the West and the East Coast was a bunch of national parks, just like the West is? We have over 11 different ecosystems in this region. It's hard to see a lot of those now because of obviously we're being so built up. But just picture if this place was a national park, it absolutely could have been. Harbor estuary system, temperate forest, you know, it goes on and on in terms of the ecosystems. This picture is from the Manhattan Project. If anybody's heard of that before, I implore you to kind of take a look and see the progression of the change of the island. And I am an educator, so I'm going to give out homework. I have a reading list for everybody later, but one piece of homework now, obviously, you know, going out and about right now is an interesting thing. So when you feel comfortable to do so, go to Inwood Hill Park. Inwood Hill Park is at the tip of, you know, Manhattan in the northern part, and it is what we're looking at right now, basically. It is untouched virgin Manhattan forest, and it's exactly what you would have encountered, you know, prior to colonial contact. So let's go back over here. So this map is of the entirety of New Netherland. New Amsterdam was the city seat, essentially, of Greater New Netherland. And Greater New Netherland essentially went from the Connecticut River to Delaware Bay. So as we're looking at this map, you know, New Amsterdam didn't start in 1626. It wasn't that a bunch of, you know, Henry Hudson came here in 1609, boop, 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 checked some stuff out, you know, made some relationships with natives to trade furs, and then that was it. A lot of people came in here after him to do exploring and to set up more relationships with natives, so that when they actually brought colonists to settle here, there, you know, there'd be something to do and some money to be made. That part from 1609 to like 1619, when I started finding out about those early exploration events, is what really got me into researching this more, because there was just so much more hidden information, and I'm hoping I can share as much as with you as I know in this hour. So 1609, Henry Hudson gets into the harbor. He goes up to Albany. Now, poor guy, he was a jerk, but he thought that he was trying to find a route to China. Why was he trying to find a route to China? Because the Portuguese had the rights to all of the trade routes to China. And so the Dutch were trying to kind of circumnavigate that and find their own routes. How were they able to kind of be so imperialistic and find their own routes? Because they revolted away from Habsburg Spain in 1580. I'll get back to that. So Henry Hudson's hanging out. He establishes some relationships with natives, and he's anchored on the west bank or the left bank of New Netherland, or of the river that was ultimately named after Henry Hudson, but it was first called the River Mauritius. He is the person who led who carried out the revolt against Habsburg Spain for the Netherlands. And so the left or the west bank is essentially Jersey City and Bayonne. And so he was anchored there. A native shot one of his crew members in the neck. That guy's name was John Coleman. When Henry Hudson left, they buried John at Sandy Hook, and they named, you know, for themselves Sandy Hook Coleman's Point at the time. I'd love to see some kind of signage out there somewhere. So now, Greater New Netherland. Okay, so we see the Connecticut River, which is, if you look straight in the middle of the map, the Connecticut River is the basically the river on the right that's going vertically. It's a little more meandering than the Hudson on the left. And then if you go kind of follow the shape of New Jersey, and you go down to essentially where Delaware Bay is in Cape May. Cape May was named after an early Dutch explorer, Cornelis May. You kind of see that, you know, Delaware Bay is a fantastic harbor. And, you know, we also know New York Harbor's pretty great too. The Dutch planned on settling in Delaware Bay. That was one of their first plans. That didn't come to fruition because when they finally sent over the ship, the New Nederland, with all of these settlers in 1624 to actually get started, they spread them out throughout New Netherland. They put some settlers down there. Those settlers had to end up coming back to New Amsterdam because they had some issues with natives. And then essentially the area around Wilmington, Delaware was abandoned. That's going to come up for us a little bit later. So, gosh, I would love to do a whole talk just with you, just on the maps of New York. And there's a book later on that deals with that. So this is kind of Greater New Netherland, which if you can see my cursor, essentially from here to here, and then all this area, Pennsylvania, a little bit of Maryland, New Jersey, and New York. So let's continue on. This guy, I like to ask why. So let's say we're on a tour and we're like, hello, welcome to the New Amsterdam tour. And let's get started talking about the colony that was here. Why were they here? So we already heard, okay, they revolted away from Habsburg Spain in the 1580s. What does that mean? That means that they created the first republic that Europe has ever seen, and the monarchies were pretty scared about that. Now let's just say they stayed a monarchy. And I'm just using this for example. Your merchant class is kind of who guides economies, regardless of those, let's say a monarchy or whatever else that has a lot of the wealth and the power. It's your merchant class that really guides economies. And Amsterdam at the time was the melting pot of Europe. So you had kind of the center of trade, 1400s was in Venice, and then it ended up moving to Amsterdam just for latitudinal reasons. It was a lot easier to get there and to get other places. So you had, almost as much of a melting pot as you would think you would have in New York City today, in Amsterdam in the late 1500s. William the Silent, Prince of Oranje. All right, I don't pronounce Dutch things so well, but I did that one okay. If anyone would like to correct anything that I say later on, please do if you are a Dutch speaker. So William the Silent, he was of nobility, but he led the revolt against Habsburg Spain, and then his son Maurice carried it out. Maurice was the Prince of Nassau. Fort Orange was the first fort set up in Albany, aka Beverwijk is what it was called, Beaver Place, essentially. That fort was destroyed by a freshet, which is essentially a flood that comes down from higher elevation in the spring. And then Fort Nassau was set up in its place. That ended up getting abandoned, and then Fort Nassau ended up moving to Wilmington, Delaware area after New Sweden left. What? New Sweden? We're going to get to that too. So excuse me if you hear any ding dongs from my phone. All right, this map is the Castello Plan. This map was surveyed in 1660. So we're towards the end of the existence of the colony. And I say existence of the colony just under Dutch rule, West India Company rule, because people kept being Dutch for a pretty long time. So the Castello Plan is showing us we're at a population of almost about 1,000 at this point, and we're also seeing the wall. So we're going to be talking about the wall a little bit later. This wall right here is the wall this is Wall Street, and Wall Street used to have an actual wall on it. That's why it got its name. That wall was to keep out the English. It wasn't really to keep out natives. It was to keep out pirates and to keep out English. And why is that? So the Dutch colony in New York Harbor was odd because the English thought per capita that they had total destiny to the eastern seaboard of the New World. And so they were always pretty pissed off that the Dutch were in one of the best harbors because it was kind of a gap in their mercantile trade, having the Dutch be there. And so, in the 1660s is when the Dutch-Anglo Wars started, and everything that happened over here in the New World all had to do with them warring with each other in the high seas and in Europe. And so any type of changes that would happen in the colonies, it's a direct reflection of what any kind of political shifts that were going on with these imperial powers. The Castello Plan was lost for a long time. It wasn't found until the early 1900s because it was sold to a member of the Medici family and found in one of their castles, or castellos, essentially. And we're very, very lucky we have this. This map was surveyed by a gentleman named Jacques Cortelyou. And I'm going to show you a few little artifacts. This is a silly one. But I can show the artifacts in much more detail towards the end of the program. So this is a canoe. Jacques Cortelyou lived in the village of Breukelen, right? So That's today's Brooklyn. That was a village in the Netherlands. And he would go to New Amsterdam about 3 days a week to do work. He was Peter Stuyvesant's director general. I'm sure you've heard Peter Stuyvesant's name. He was the last director general of New Amsterdam. He came in to kind of whip the colony into shape, and we'll kind of talk about him later. Why is this lady holding a canoe? Because he commuted. Jacques Cordeloup is like the first commuter, truly, of New York City, or what was going to become New York City. So we're very lucky we have the Castello plan, and I guarantee you've seen it before, perhaps. But before I get into that, this is a map of Amsterdam in the 1500s. It's weird how similar it looks to New Amsterdam. In terms of New Amsterdam, there wasn't as much, basically taking the land from the sea as they did in the Netherlands. There was a little bit of it though. So right here, this is Amsterdam, right? So, Amsterdam is full of canals. A canal was built on Broad Street, and it went all the way almost up to the stock exchange so that you could get goods further inland that were coming off of ships. The Dutch were fantastic shipbuilders too, and very technologically advanced for their day. I mean, we're in the melting pot of the world of Amsterdam, and so it's trade, it's education, it's art, it's the Dutch golden age that's going on in the 1600s. So, and breaking away from Habsburg Spain truly allowed them to invest the way that they wanted to. They were intensely intelligent investors, and really birthed the Dutch West India Company birthed our modern economy. It was the first true mega corporation. And they had the rights to commit any kind of violence or plunder all they wanted to on behalf of the Republic. All right, let's see here. Oop. Go back. All right, so this is a map, actually, if you were to be on the tour and walking around Lower Manhattan. I hand these maps out, Justin and I would hand these maps out to people to kind of walk around with. So Fort Amsterdam is exactly where the United States Customs House is right now. So, and we're looking at the Heerstraat, Gentleman's Way, AKA Broadway. Broadway was not a road that was laid out or whatever by any Dutch. And when I say Dutch, the Dutch owned the West India Company, but the people that were here, I mean, there was a Jesuit priest that visited in like 1643 that said he heard 18 languages spoken on the streets of New Amsterdam, which you would think, like, is that when Ellis Island was in its heyday? No, when Ellis Island was in its heyday, you'd hear like 37 languages spoken. But 18 languages spoken in a colony in the middle of nowhere, it's pretty impressive. So Broadway, though, that was an old Indian trail. It was called the Wequesquick Trail. We are not knowing how to pronounce the names of these smaller tribes, but Wequesquick was a tribe that had territory around here. You also had a tribe called Canarsie, right? So there's a lot of place names that follow the Lenni Lenape, and I think I'm going to make sure. We're gonna talk about Native history, but I do know a lot, and I think I might want to do an entire talk on Native history. So I think we're gonna keep a decent amount of that out of this talk here. So as we're looking at this map, we know Fort Amsterdam is the United States Customs House, AKA the Smithsonian Museum of the Native American. So I had mentioned before, the wall was to keep the English out, right? The fort was to keep natives out. And on the exact spot is now the only place that houses Native history in New York City, which is really intensely ironic. Also, if you kind of come over here, if you can see my cursor, this is Broad Street today, and this is where the canal was dug out. This canal just ended up having, garbage and dead livestock thrown into it, and it was a stinking sewer, and it was filled in by the English when they took over. Now, if we kind of look right here, there's a small canal there. And then there was a little bridge that went over that canal. That is Bridge Street today. Also, that's Pearl Street. Pearl Street gets its name because there was a large Native American shell midden. And a shell midden is just a big pile of shells. Discarded oyster shells is what we're speaking of. And, as you kind of walk next to it and step on those shells, you see that pearlescence from the inside of an oyster shell. So the name got named Pearl Street. All right, let's kind of continue on. Actually, you know what, one second. So there were native skirmishes. I know I just mentioned I'm not going to talk about natives too much, but during certain native skirmishes, if you take a look into the fort, they would have most of the colonists that were all around the greater New Netherland area come back to New Amsterdam for safety, because most of their farms would have gotten burnt up, they would have gotten killed or perhaps kidnapped. So they would create little, or build little straw huts and sleep inside of the fort until it was safe enough to go build their farmhouses again, perhaps, let's say, on the left or west bank, in the area of where Jersey City is today. That's where I live. That's why I mentioned it. So we're going to keep going on. Notice here too, you see the arms, the coat of arms of Amsterdam, and their flag. It's the 3 X's. If anybody happens to be walking past Manhattan Municipal Building, you will see that symbol on the building. This is the bronze version of the Castello plan. It's really lovely to go up and look at this and get, you know, even more of a up close view. I'm not going to keep it on here too long, but if you notice over here, this is a windmill. Here, let's show the windmill. This is also a windmill. Hello. That windmill would help grind grain, so it was called a grist mill. Let me go back here. So see up here where it says D right here, this is a West India Company farm, and you would have kind of like higher class aristocratic type people that lived here. The Dutch built so many successful farms, and especially grain fields, that the English were able to have flour be their main export when they took over the colony. And I'll show you something about that here in a second. All right. So we'll go past this. This is a Google map showing kind of the outline of the colony, and then how much land reclamation has happened after that. So the Dutch didn't do too much land reclamation. The English did a decent amount of it afterwards. Essentially, if you were to, let's see here, let's say there's a pier here and a pier here, and you paid the money to fill in all the space between those 2 piers, you now owned that land. And so that was a way that the English actually did a lot of land reclamation. And then, of course, once we became the United States, we did that a lot more. But if you notice, I mean, Pearl Street and then Water Street, that was pretty much it. That was the shoreline back then. Little piece of homework, and then you can ask me about this again later. I would love everybody to watch and find a documentary on PBS called Sinking Cities. And they have an episode about New York, and they're talking about and comparing to the Netherlands how we're going to deal with future storm surges and sea level rise. And there's a thought of putting a wall, which some of you might have heard de Blasio talk about this past year, putting a wall of sod or of earth all around the tip of Lower Manhattan to protect it. So then you would have to climb that wall to be able to see vistas of New York Harbor. So wonder what they're going to choose. But that's homework. Sinking Cities, the New York episode. This map, we're kind of going a little back in time. This is the 1639 Manatus map, right? Manatus is a Lenni Lenape word, which you would say Algonquin. Algonquin is their linguistic group. That could mean island of hills or place of general inebriation. I'm not really too sure. It's debatable. So Staten Island, you can see Staten Island was named after the States General. States General was a council, essentially that was in power once most of the, basically half of the Netherlands became a republic. The other half ended up staying with Habsburg Spain. And we see here that Hudson's River is called the North River. Henry Hudson was an Englishman. So when the English took over, they were happy to name it after Henry Hudson, even though he was employed to explore on behalf of the Dutch. And let me add, on behalf of the Dutch East India Company, because the Dutch West India Company didn't exist until people essentially settled here. And that's a whole other hour. So the North River, right? At first it was called the River Mauritius, and we know it was who Maurice is. Maurice is the who carried out the revolt against Habsburg Spain. So when I mentioned too that your merchant class really guides economies, the Dutch were such fantastic investors. They would overcapitalize their ventures just to make sure that they were even more successful. You would have a middle-class merchant that would be offered to invest in a ship, but only 10% of one ship. He wouldn't purchase the entire thing, because 1 in 10 ships, early explorer ships, went down because of pirates or bad weather. They also had to be incredibly small. The Mayflower, the Nina, the Pinta, the Santa Maria, they are a lot smaller than you would ever expect, because they had to be just big enough to make the ocean journey, but then they also had to be a right size to fit up the confluence of rivers, because that's how you're going to get around once you reach land. Difference between the Dutch and the English also is the English were more so in the business of acquiring land masses for permanent settlement for their colonies. The Dutch never wanted to do that. Because they were all about saving money, and so they knew that that was actually too costly. So it was to go in and set up some kind of temporary outpost, however long that might be, but not to have actual permanent settlement. So the North River is not called the North River anymore. We know it's called the Hudson's River, but in the upper bay of New York Harbor, the upper bay is where the Statue of Liberty and Ellis Island and things like that are. The lower bay is on the other side of the Verrazano Narrows. So in the upper bay of New York Harbor, mariners today still call it the North River. I've talked to an old timer at the South Street Seaport, and he just really casually off the cuff called it the North River. It was really, really interesting to hear. So again, and so this map is drafted in Europe, but it's surveyed here. And if you notice where my cursor is, this is Governor's Island. So from 1609, right, let's say Henry Hudson was hanging out like right around here. So when his crew member John Coleman got shot in the neck. After him, these explorers would come up and then go up to Albany. On their way to Albany, they would stop on Governor's Island. They wouldn't stop in Lower Manhattan. That was just essentially forested land at the time. Governor's Island was their staging point, essentially. Stop, rest, get their stuff together, go up to Albany, trade with natives, and then come back. Hang out on Governor's Island a little bit, and then take off. That was where New Amsterdam was supposed to be also. Not only was there a thought of having it being in Wilmington, Delaware, but on Governor's Island. So if you notice, there's a little X right there. Actually, you know what? I think, here we go. So on Governor's Island on the left in red, there's an X. That's a windmill, okay? That windmill wasn't there. It was over here. Archaeologists found evidence of that windmill, and it's patented from the late 1500s, and they did all their research, and it really was on Governor's Island, but it was essentially down here. Governor's Island has the only glass bead found in all of New York City as well. There was, it's much harder to find artifacts in Manhattan, as there's just been so much progress and change in buildings being dug up. All right, let's see here. Am I on time here? Oh boy. Oh boy. So first stock market in the world is in Amsterdam in the 1580s, right here. What are they talking about? They are guessing the future price of peppercorn, because peppercorn and spices are the hottest commodity. Henry Hudson went all the way to Albany thinking he was going to find China just to try to get some of this stuff. So the Dutch Golden Age, right? They're truly at the height of their power. They're incredible investors. Why is Lower Manhattan the seat of, finance today? It's absolutely because of New Amsterdam. You have the East India Company, the biggest mega corporation the world had ever seen, and it was in existence for 200 years. The Dutch West India Company was a subsidiary of it, essentially. What we're looking at now, a painting of the girl with a pearl earring, which I love. It's gorgeous. That's by Jan Vermeer, which probably not pronouncing the name right, or Jan Vermeer. Jan Vermeer was actually from Delft in Holland, where they make Dutch Delft tiles. This is an example of one of those, and I can show it to you also later. It's a very specific ceramic making style, because people were trying to figure out how China made such wonderful ceramics, and they just couldn't figure it out. They couldn't get the recipe right. And on the right is Rembrandt. That is a self-portrait of Rembrandt. And you can tell that the Dutch were certainly in their golden age and a lot of resources, because he looks like he's had a lot of resources. All right, let's see here. There we go. So if you were looking at the colony kind of in its middle stages, this is what you would see. Let's say, let's say you're taking a little ride on the Staten Island Ferry and you're about to pull up to that terminal. That's essentially kind of what that view is right now. And so we can see the fort. The fort is in the back here, and that one windmill that I had mentioned before is right outside of it. There is a flagpole today that is in the spot of where that windmill is, donated by Dutch historians from the Netherlands that really love their New York connections. In the front, you have what is a gallows, but also some type of like a derrick crane, something where, you could put ropes on it and then lift heavier cargo off of a ship, essentially, that was coming into the harbor. And if we look right here, so where my cursor is, I believe, don't quote me on it, this might be the place of the Stadthouse. The Stadthouse was essentially the city hall of New Amsterdam. We'll get to that in a second. So here's what's funny about giving a tour or talk when I can't ask anybody anything, because normally I'd be like, who's this guy? And somebody would know who he is, but that's Peter Stuyvesant. And Peter Stuyvesant, he wasn't as religiously tolerant as the rest of his people. So when you have Amsterdam, we have the seat of trade, very religiously tolerant, very educated place. It makes no sense to discriminate against somebody per their religion if they're just, coming to a place to make money. If you come here, you can make it if you try, right? It's like that was said about New Amsterdam in the 1600s, and it's still the way New York is today. The Dutch West India Company said, look, we don't have windows into men's souls, so whoever's coming here can come here. You have to officially be a part of the Dutch Calvinist Church if you want to go into a structure to worship. But if you don't want to, you can do whatever the heck you want in your own house. Just don't build your own church. That's pretty much all the requirements were. If anybody knows about the Quakers, that's a whole different story, and we're not even going there right now. Peter Stuyvesant was about the 6th Director General. They all weren't very good, and one of the reasons that we don't have records from the early days is because one or two of those Director Generals took all of them with him back to Amsterdam so he could plead his case and kind of defend himself. So that's what happened to those early records. And we're basically think Verhulst took them. Willem Verhulst was the first. Peter Minuit was the 2nd Director General. After him came Van Twiller. Van Twiller was a pretty nice guy. After Van Twiller was Kieft, and Kieft was a not nice guy. And so if we have time, we'll get into him too. When the English came to take over this colony, there was no fighting. They didn't want any fighting. They just said, hey, look, we're going to take this over. We have the Dutch-Anglo Wars going on, and it's just about high time that we're going to take this. Peter Stuyvesant wanted to fight. He was a soldier with the West India Company. He has that peg leg because he was involved with in a battle with the Spanish in Curacao, and a cannonball knocked his leg off. Now, New Amsterdam was ran as well as it could have been. Some people have thought it was just kind of like this ramshackle colony, whatever. It was ran okay, but it was also highly neglected because the Dutch were so pissed off at the Spanish, they kind of kept harassing their colonies in the New World and South America so much they didn't pay enough attention to New Amsterdam. When the English took over, Peter was like, hey, let's fight. And he was telling his cannoneer on the walls of the fort, like, hey, shoot him, fight. And they were like, yeah, no, that's a really bad idea. There's some really big English warships out there. And one of the people that signed the petition telling him not to fight was his son. And so he obviously backed down. So, and then in my reading list, there's an article that I listed by Justin Rivers, and I love the name. It's called New York is the New Orange. Or you could say New York is the New Oranje. That talks about the Dutch coming back in 1673. And it really wasn't the Dutch. It was just this demagogue, really, that just came and wanted New Amsterdam back and named it New Orange. And he was here for about 9 months. And then the English were like, okay, cool, you really got to get out. They signed a treaty, and then they officially traded Suriname for New Amsterdam. This is the city seal. I like breaking down the New York City seal. It's some form of it has essentially been in existence since the late 1700s, perhaps 1800s. But if we take this apart, right, we're looking at a sailor on the left. He's holding a plummet in his hand. That plummet is to measure water depth, right? We are a maritime place. In the seal is the windmill. The windmill is in the shape of the St. John's Cross to match the arms of Amsterdam. And inside of that shield are 2 beavers. So funny story, when I was talking about this to some students at the South Street Seaport, we're doing a New Amsterdam program. Sorry about that. Here we go. Okay, sorry about that. 1 second. Okay. Hey, Justin, I need your help. Ooh, he's gone. Okay. 1 second here.
Hello, I'm here. What's up?
I got a phone call and it took everything away. All right, sorry.
What did your screen blank out? There you go.
Yeah.
You may have to refresh your slides, maybe.
Yep.
And your presentation should come back, and then just go back into.
Here we go.
Yeah.
Sorry, folks. Let's start from the proper slide here.
As we continue to say, it's like, hey, breaking eggs to make an omelet. So here we are.
Breaking eggs. All right, here we go.
No, don't. You're sharing it, not presenting it. You hit share and find it by accident. Don't worry about it. Now, all of the insiders know exactly how Mandy and I have most of our conversations, and then we just usually laugh at each other. All right, I'm going back on mute until you need me again. Bye.
Okay, bye. We have fun. Oh my goodness.
You're the best.
Bye. Bye. So let me get back. Excuse me, folks. So sorry. And so when I was speaking before, I'd mentioned that about the beavers. So I was talking to my kids at the South Street Seaport Museum, right? Beaver was the main export of New Amsterdam. I hope I've driven that home hard enough, but I know I've been going kind of quick. I was like, hey kids, what is that? You know, what's that? What are these symbols on there? Because they do New Amsterdam programming in school as well. And they were like, those are New York City subway rats. And I was like, you know what? That's a perfectly contemporary answer. But they are beavers, actually. And on the sides are barrels. Now, as a little young buck to New York City history, and I knew some things, but maybe not all things, I look at those barrels and I say, that must be rum, right? Because of sugarcane production and in the Caribbean. And I was wrong. Those are barrels of flour. The Dutch planted so many good farms and grain fields that ended up being the main export of New York Colony. New York Colony was a gift essentially from King Charles II to his brother James Stewart, who was about in 2 years to become the director of the Royal African Trading Company. And so essentially New York Colony was there to be a Grand Central on the slave trade. Most of the labor that would come over from Africa went down to the Caribbean for sugarcane production. Below here, we have Novi Ebarachi. I think it's just one of the most beautiful words, and it means New York in Latin. York of England was a part of the Holy Roman Empire. This is a symbol that I took at the base of like a light pole. Actually, let me go back too. Obviously, we can't not talk about our native, the Lenni Lenape. But when you see city symbols like this, if anybody has seen the television show Parks and Recreation, you know, you often see interesting depictions of natives and citizens, whatever. So this is the flag of the Dutch West India Company. It's orange and blue. There's a lot of orange and blue in New York, and that's the reason, that's the connection. On the right, it turned red in 1650. They changed the color of the flag in 1650. What I have here is the flag that you could have bought at Governor's Island a few years ago in their gift shop, right? And Governor's Island has a lot of New Amsterdam archaeology. It was supposed to be where New Amsterdam was going to be settled, but one of the engineers that came over on that ship, the New Nederland, that brought the 30 different families, most of them were from a place, region in Belgium called Wallonia. They were refugees. Some were French Huguenots. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. But so this flag is wrong. So it looks like it kind of says like AOC right here, and it's upside down and backwards. It's supposed to say VOC. VOC is the East India Company, and I'm not very good at pronouncing that. So maybe someone can say that for us later on in the question and answer part. I would love you for that. You'll do see the West India Company symbol on the flagpole that is right outside of the fort, basically essentially at number 1 Broadway, right when you enter Battery Park, right across the street from the Customs House. So let's see here. You know what? We might not do this. So this guy, I'm skipping over a little bit of stuff, but if we have time for it later, we'll get into it. This is Peter Minuit, or Peter Minuit. He was the one who made that famous purchase of Manhattan for 60 guilders. It wasn't 60 guilders. The value of the goods that are traded gets higher once they get over to the New World from Amsterdam. So there's a value in it that we're not taking into account. If you do the math on what 60 guilders is, it transfers into like 24, US dollars. So the fun little joke about like the sale of Manhattan was $24 is not necessarily true. It's a really cute story. There's different ways. There's different historians have done like the forensic accounting to try to really figure this out, and the Institute of Social History of Amsterdam put the 60 guilders at the time, the equivalent of about $1,000 US. And then we had other historians that were really taking into account the value of the beer and the brandy, because natives didn't make their own fermented drinks at the time. So that was highly valuable to them. And that would probably require them giving more beaver pelts in exchange for it. But some historians basically figured out that it was probably about $15,000 US worth of trade goods, axe heads, nails, things that were forged out of metal, where they had the technology of that in Europe, but they did not have that here. Natives would make copper amulets, but copper is really soft and you can kind of pound it into shape. Peter Minuit, the second Director General, he makes the famous purchase. The purchase might not have happened in Minuit Plaza. Minuit Plaza is right in front of where, the Staten Island Ferry Terminal. That is also where the Costello plan is. And it's thought that he was in Inwood Hill Park when that famous purchase happened. And, there's just such a huge cultural divide. And I think one of the main things I really want to bring home in terms of Native history is that they had their own incredibly in-depth political systems, wars that had been going on with other tribes for years and years. It's even been posited that our Constitution is somewhat based off of the Iroquois Confederacy, some similar to a Constitution type thing, but that's just really kind of been posited. So it's said that Peter Minuit purchased Manhattan in Inwood Hill Park, and there was just some native that was in their territory up there that was walking by that was like, yeah, sure, you want to buy Manhattan? Great, I'll sell it to you, no problem. So there's a rock when you go to Inwood Hill Park, because I really want you all to go. There's a rock at the trailhead that's called Shop Cappy Rock, and it actually mentions that the famous purchase actually might have happened right there. So in terms of Peter Minuit, he surveys, we're looking at Delaware Bay, right? If you go on the left here. He surveyed Wilmington, Delaware area for the Dutch as Director General because they wanted to really settle there, right? He gets recalled back to Amsterdam. At this time, Sweden, King Adolphus, he's got a lot of money and power, and he wants to use it, and he wants to be all imperial like the French and the Portuguese and the Dutch and stuff. You had and by the way, the Portuguese and the Spanish, they were like in their heyday in like the late 14 and in most of 1500s, but then the Dutch and the English kind of like more 1700s really ended up kind of taking over. So Peter Minuit's back in Amsterdam. He's contacted to come lead New Sweden. And so it's essentially, this area is available because the Dutch had already decided to settle in Lower Manhattan and create their essentially their city right there. So Peter Minuit comes in, and for 17 years, New Sweden is in Wilmington, Delaware. In 1655, you have Peter Stuyvesant. He is now Director General of New Amsterdam. He goes to New Sweden, and he's like, hey, you guys are done. Your Queen Christina of Sweden, just abdicated the throne. She's donezo's, and she has basically lost all of the wealth, or a lot of the wealth that they had. So they lost their power. The Dutch were able to take this part back. This ended up becoming a part of New Netherland in 1655. Obviously, it was only going to be theirs for about 11 years or 9 to 10 years. And today, still, there are plenty of descendants in Wilmington, Delaware with Swedish descent, and children will learn Swedish dances and different types of traditional rituals, and they really do, they do keep up their history. But it's just this kind of really interesting blurb that we don't hear about. If anybody has ever read The Island at the Center of the World, that is a book by Russell Shorto. He spent 3 years with Dr. Charlie Gehring in the New Netherland Institute to create that almost like a Bible of New Amsterdam history. I mean, that's really what brought a lot of this to light. And I lost my train of thought a little bit there. Let's see here. Let's go back here. So anyway, so Peter Stuyvesant, he goes to New Sweden. He's like, look, you guys are done. And what happens is the natives there retaliate because they had really good relationships with the Swedes. And also there were more native trade routes over there, kind of towards the west a little bit, that the Dutch wanted. So they were like, look, you guys got to go. The natives that they had traded with were really upset, and they retaliated. That's when the West India Company came up with the excuse of the Peach War. The Peach War is just a diversion to essentially not embarrass the leaders of New Amsterdam for not having as good enough of a relationship with the natives as the Swedes did. So they blamed this native retaliation and this skirmish on a girl stealing a peach. Peaches came over from the New World, stealing a peach from a peach tree on a farm near Trinity Church. The farmer shot her, and then her tribe's people retaliated. That is just a really cute little story, and it's not true. So this is the famous, painting of the famous purchase, the trinkets and the baubles in the chest. So this is actually a good view of, I might have to stop talking because this has been an hour already, I apologize. This is a good view of a Dutch colonist. See the hat that they're wearing? That hat was made out of felt, and that felt came from beaver skin. So that was one of the main things that they were making from these beaver skins, were those hats. And if you've ever seen a like cigar wrapper that says Dutch Masters on it, it's got a picture of a guy that looks just like that. So this is a view of the bridge that's over Broad Street that I had pointed out before, that went over the canal that was dug out to get goods inland. And this is the Stadthouse. The Stadthouse was essentially the city hall. And if you notice the stepped gables on the side, that's Dutch architecture. It's very indicative of Belgium and Dutch architecture. If you notice how close it is to the shoreline, it definitely got flooded a lot. And so this thing had fallen into disrepair by the time the English had taken over. And this is where the Stadthaus was. This yellow brick right here, excuse me, this outline is where the Stadthaus was. And this is Coenties Slip here. Francis Tavern is like beep boop right there. So that is Dutch yellow brick. Dutch yellow brick would often, you know, obviously they needed building materials, but it also helped because it was ballast for ships when they were coming back empty after the dropping off all their furs. The warehouse where the furs were dropped off in Amsterdam, that building still exists today. I'm not exactly sure where it is, but I can find that out for anyone. Keep in mind this Dutch yellow brick, because they wouldn't just make bricks out of this clay. This clay was very abundant in their riverbeds. And they would also bring the clay raw, and they would often like over mortar, you know, any of their kind of stone projects. There's Beaver, hey buddy. I'm gonna skip through this view. So this brings me to the wall. So on the right, that is a diagram from the 1600s if you were going to build a stockade against a savage in Indonesia, because that was the main colony of the West India Company. On the left is a drawing that really you can kind of match to those diagrams of the actual wall that was on Wall Street. Now, also, so Dutch spoken in the 1600s, the closest thing that you can hear to that today is the language Afrikaans in South Africa. When a language goes to a place and then that language doesn't get a chance to evolve any longer, it's going to become like a low language, right? So there was a gentleman that visited New Jersey in, you know, the mid 1700s, late 1700s, and was like, man, these people are speaking Dutch, but I don't know what kind of Dutch it is. It's very difficult to figure out. So almost finished here, so we can do some question and answer. This is the wall. It was made out of stone with palisaded logs that to a point on top, and the oops, go back. And this is the foundation of the wall. This is in the basement of Federal Hall National Monument, which sits on Wall Street. And on the left is similar to the Dutch yellow brick. That's the yellow clay. They over mortared the bottom of the wall. When you have different buildings in Manhattan that come down and then another building is built in its place, it is a very inefficient and a waste of time and energy to dig up a foundation. So you're going to reuse it. On the right is the foundation of the city hall that was built, essentially what was called Federal Hall, in the place that where the wall was. So we saw the Stadthaus, the first city hall, the second city hall, 1699. This is the foundation to that building that was built by Freemasons. And again, and so if you look here too, these rocks right here are kind of, I have a geology background actually. So you can actually tell that those rocks are like from the river, that they've got some algae in them or they've been tossed around in water. And that was very common. You're just going to find the rocks, whatever kind of shape of rocks that you could find, and create a wall for your foundation. Right below it is a piece of brownstone that used to be called Jersey freestone. And that's the same, and it comes from New Jersey, and it's the same material that the brownstone homes are made out of. These are pictures I just threw in there. I used to be a park ranger, and I dealt with Federal Hall National Monument, and I did some work there too, so I was able to go take these pictures. But so the Federal Hall National Monument was torn down. That was or Federal Hall essentially was torn down, the first city hall of New York. That's where George Washington was inaugurated. In its place was the United States Treasury, Alexander Hamilton Treasury. So this is a photo from that time period, basically. And that's super, super insider stuff, because like nobody can go down there. On the right is that City Hall or Federal Hall that I had mentioned. On the left is, again, you can kind of tell that those rocks are probably just found around. This document specifically says, dismantle the wall and use those stones to build the new City Hall. So it's absolutely proof that we're looking at, you know, the archaeology of the wall in the basement of Federal Hall, but archaeologists haven't actually done too many official studies yet. So I'm going to try to work on that. Let's see here. Where are we? So Justin, Are you able to come back on? Should I stop?
Okay, Mandy. So I think the consensus is we're going to take some questions. It's 1 o'clock. We're going to take some questions.
Sorry.
Now we all knew this was going to happen, and everybody's really loving it. But some people do have to jump off.
Right.
We are also going to let you continue for those who want to stay on.
Great. And if
how
anybody,
much time do you think you have? Like 10, 15 minutes left?
I have all the time in the world, but I'm just worried about our people.
Yeah, no, I would
Or
say,
you guys have to go to work.
knowing what I know about your presentation, you probably have about another 15 minutes, which I think is fine. But if there are any questions, if you've got to sign off,
Yeah.
you can put them in the chat now and we can answer them. We have been technically trying to answer some of them as we go along.
Awesome.
Peter asks, in your first image, what are the cross poles to the left of the windmill? Peter, do you, in her very first slide?
Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. Oh. Are those ship masts? I see what you see those, the poles to the left.
Yes, and it's got a flag on top. I don't think that's a ship mast. It's also kind of shaped like it seems like you can climb it. Oh,
on the
I'm
other
sorry.
side. You see those crossed poles on the other side of the windmill?
Right here?
Not the flagpole.
Oh.
Those, yeah.
I would not say that they're ship masts because that's the Hudson side and that's where the current is really heavy. And so that's why Coenty Slip was on the East River side. The same thing with South Street Seaport. The Harbridge is much more calm there.
Yeah.
But I mean, I can't say that one.
That's a good question. You know, I've never even noticed them.
Yeah, that's a great question.
Any other questions for Mandy if you have to go? Mandy, I was telling everybody the story. Well, I think Peter actually asked if you can see the foundation in Federal Hall. And I was telling him in chat the story of the night you snuck in and started sending me pictures with expletives.
Yeah.
With the pictures of the wall.
Right.
It is, like as Mandy said, super, super secret. You have to know somebody to get access.
Right. I was an employee, so that was kind of why. And I've actually just got the word that I'm allowed to share some of these photos more now.
Yeah.
So.
Yes, Peter, we'll get on it because now I'm interested. It's strange. I've never noticed them before. Those polls. Mm-hmm. Interesting.
Yeah.
We're gonna put, you know what, Mandy, let me put your tip slide up just for a minute. Because people are asking for your tip information.
Thanks.
And also it's coming back in the chat. So give me 1 second. I'm gonna share my screen.
I'm gonna put this up while you're doing.
So for everybody who has to go, this is Mandy's tip information so that everybody can see it. I'll leave this up for a minute or two while questions are coming in. And then also, I know Michelle put it in the chat. Mandy, you're getting rave reviews, by the way.
Thank you. Thank you.
We knew Mandy was going to be awesome.
And I just talked a lot. Sorry.
No. It's good. Everybody's loving it. And we've been told there should be a part 2, which Mandy, you and I have already discussed anyway.
I mean, I'm ready. I'm ready for part 2. Well, and I kind of have to because I have to show you all the things that I prepared for you that I didn't get a chance to.
I noticed you skipped over the fence, which I'm just would like to say that I went out and filmed 2 virtual tours for Untapped, which will be available soon. One is a Secrets of Financial District tour, and the other one is Brooklyn Bridge. And we cover the fence in detail on the video as well. But that fence, as you see the people in the picture here on the screen, is a really awesome artifact in Lower Manhattan. And we'll leave it at that. We can get into it.
See the virtual tour.
Will these resources include an archive presentation?
So the chat won't be, but if they email us, we can send over a chat transcript.
And also, Mandy, are you comfortable sending your or putting your email out there so you can email your reading list to people, or I can do it if you want?
Yeah,
I do.
think
It's my last slide. So you want me to put that up or?
No,
Yeah,
it's
why don't-
her PayPal, Mandy Edgecombe at Gmail. So
Oh, yeah, there it is.
know how to reach her.
There you go.
Oh yeah, right. It's on the PayPal
And
thing.
Mandy can send you her reading list. It is extensive and it's very, very good. The reading list is great. And also, I don't know if people can see, but I also have my flag. That Mandy
Yay. But it's upside down and backwards, don't forget. Yay, VOC.
You could imagine how much fun Mandy and I are when we have a beer on Stone Street, because all we do is talk about this stuff for like 3 hours.
Yep.
All right. Any questions for Mandy?
I think we can move forward and
Okay.
then I'll monitor the chats.
Okay. So let me take my screen down. Mandy, we'll let you finish.
Okay.
And then everybody who's here, your tours have been great. Yes, Richard, I'll reach out to you to answer your question. Thank you for giving me your email. Wait, I lost my cursor. There we go. Stop share. All right, Mandy, you should be able to share if you want to finish. Just so you know, I am doing a Coney Island talk in a few minutes. So Mandy, I may need to jump off in about 10.
I'm just gonna.
Yeah, and Justin's Coney Island talk will be for us later, but this one is for a very adorable retirement.
These are for my seniors up in Inwood, the Mariah. This is how this all started, by the way. I was doing literally these talks last year for these seniors, and they are the best. And so they wanted a Coney Island talk for the summer. So I'm going to go do it, and then we'll do it for insiders because it's a lot of fun.
Oh, that's great.
All right. Mandy, it's back to you to finish up.
All right. So we'll just kind of finish this up quickly, and then I'm going to read something to you and show you a little clip of a movie that's more homework for everyone that I'd love you to watch. And my screen is up, right?
No, you're going to have to click share screen at the bottom and repeat.
I see what changing. Oh, there it is. Share screen.
And you're back. Woohoo. All right. Good job.
Sweet,
go for it.
And then we did that. Okay. So kind of just to wrap it up, a couple more things. I just want to finish the wall a little bit. What this is the Articles of Capitulation. So essentially what this is like, hey, look, we're the English. We're coming to take over. We don't want to tell you guys what to do. Continue living your lives. And these are some excerpts that I had grabbed from that. This has a lot to do with how Dutch culture just, permeated and stayed in this area. So Dr. Charlie Gehring grew up in the Hudson Valley when he was told to go out and feed the chickens. And this is the 1960s, 1950s. He's a kid. When he was told to go out and feed the chickens, his mom said, say kip, kip, kip to get the chickens to come. Kip means chicken in Dutch, but his mom didn't know that. That's just something that they'd always done, right? It was just a part of the culture. If you've ever talked to someone from Long Island, they got such a Long Island accent, right? It doesn't make sense to say that hard G necessarily in that accent. Long Island was the name that the Dutch gave it, and it has a hard G in it, and linguists really can't figure out any other way why that is a part of the accent unless it comes from Lange, essentially. You have the Roosevelts, you have the Vanderbilts. These are all old Dutch families. The women after dinner while the men are smoking cigars and drinking brandy as late as the 1880s would go and speak Dutch in the kitchen, because learning it by at least by the 1880s, you might not have spoken in the home growing up, but you would learn it because you were wealthy and educated. You have President Martin van Buren, his first language was Dutch. Sojourner Truth's first language was Dutch. And so here, let's see here. I'm going to skip over this part. This is the battery wall. Battery Park got its name from a battery wall that the English built. But so I love this truck, right? It's a temporary partition specialist. They build walls, but where does he, like that truck usually lives? On Wall Street or in Lower Manhattan. And so this is a truck that just says wall to wall and it's on Wall Street. I mean, that's really why I'm sharing it. But I went up to the guy once and I was like, you do know how ironic this is, right? And he was like, totally, I totally do. And so that's like a whole other conversation. Really quick, I want to talk about money, if that's okay. Very, very quick. What's on the left is a diagram of the sizes of Spanish reale coins. In the middle is a Spanish reale coin. On the right is a florin. It's a coin from the Bank of Florence. You don't want your colonies to mint their own money. And if it's obviously it's going to be involved in some kind of maritime trade, because that's how you get around the world. You're going to use currency that's just valuable wherever, right? And so these Spanish reale coins, florins, these were used in New Amsterdam, and so was wampum. Wampum is a bead from a quahog clamshell. This is a quahog clamshell. Most of them are white, but some of them are purple. The purple ones are more money, or essentially worth more. So you would either, let's say you wanted to buy a thing of bread from a baker and you weren't going to trade them anything. You maybe give them a stiver of wampum. A stiver is like a smaller version of a guilder, essentially. And it's so hard to see these, but that is like a wampum bead, and you would put them on a string and you would purchase things that way in the colony. One of the connections to us now, or like contemporary culture, is the middle coin, the Spanish reale coin. If you needed to cut it up into different, and to make it smaller, you cut it up into pizza pie little triangles, and those pieces would be called bits of 8. And in the movie Roger Rabbit, when he's hiding from the guys that are gonna get him, he does this whole thing where he's knocking, he goes, shave and a haircut, 2 bits. And that shave and a haircut cost 2 bits of a Spanish reale coin. That's what the 2 bits part comes from. If anybody's ever had a cookie, do anybody like cookies? I mean, that's a stupid question, right? That is a Dutch thing, and that comes from New Amsterdam. Cookies were actually, they were just delicious little sweet things to eat. The English called them biscuits, right? So we didn't want to do that here once we became our own country. But cookies were actually little things that you would test out the temperature of your oven to bake bread, and then to see how hot it was, essentially. That's what the idea of a cookie was. This is a VOC coin. So this was actually used in British colonial days. It's also called the first New York penny. This is one from 1732. The VOC didn't start printing out their own coins. Gosh, I'm sure this is not the best to see, but it's the same coin that you're looking at here. That one's from 1745. That's when they started minting their own coins. And again, these things would have been used in their colonies or perhaps other colonies. When I went, I mean, essentially, these were Dutch coins that were used by the English. It was just because they were very valuable. When I went on these coin forums, when I was purchasing this, old timers had said that they still found these things in their changes from corner stores and bodegas up until the 1950s and 60s, which is insane. So let's see here. All right, 1 second before we get to that. So this cannon is called the oyster paste cannon. I don't really say that right. If you were to say it in English, it's oyster pasty, which is kind of hilarious. This cannon was found on the Hudson River on the west side, near where that aristocratic farm that I pointed out earlier was. It was found by archaeologists, and it ended in the late 1800s. And it ended up being used as the staircase post for a staircase to the building of 55 Broadway for decades, until someone was like, let's probably like not do that, and let's show this thing off. And then the Battery Park Conservancy takes care of it now. They don't call it the oyster pasty cannon though. They call it like some other cannon, but it's the oyster pasty cannon. And a pasty is actually kind of, so that type of pastry, it would have meat or fish in it, but often it would have oysters in it because this entire region, or the entire harbor, was one of the largest concentration of oyster reefs in the world before they were mostly killed off in the 1800s, late 1800s, because of pollution. But this pasty, it was kind of like an empanada. It was like a closed baked thing, and it was similar to an empanada. So again, we're totally going to have a part 2. But so before that, though, I just want to mention something. When the Dutch custom of tolerance, basically, it obviously had a lot to do with education, but it also, they were so smart about what not to do to impede trade, right? So that, as it is in the 1600s, as is now, if you're coming here to make money, come on in. Peter Stuyvesant, I had mentioned that his father was a Calvinist minister and that he wasn't very tolerant because he actually tried to stop a boat full of Sephardic Jews coming from Brazil because their colony was taken by the Dutch. They had passports from the West India Company to come here. There are Jewish people on the board of directors of the West India Company. And Peter Stuyvesant was like, nope, you're not coming in. And, nope, we don't want your thought here. And his, the council people that he had in New Amsterdam at the time were like, absolutely not. That's not how we do things. They can come here all they want. If they're coming here to make money, let them. And that's 1654. And that is the date of when the Shahar of Israel, the oldest Jewish congregation in the New World, started. And they were worshiping in the basements of their homes. And that congregation still exists today. And it's in the 70s on the Upper West Side. And they really take care of their history. We can talk about their first cemetery next time, actually. So it's, the Dutch custom of tolerance didn't impede trade, right? And then you have the English taking over and then not changing much of the Dutch culture, continuing to let these people live exactly how they lived. Not a single person wanted to go back to Amsterdam. They stayed in New Amsterdam. This is where they lived and where they wanted to stay. It's interesting then that reaches us to our revolution. So the Dutch revolt from Habsburg Spain, they create the first republic in Europe, and then they can continue those cultural values here. And then all of a sudden we get to our own revolution. Our own revolution was absolutely inspired by the Dutch Revolution, and it's carried out by the ancestors of those hardy people that revolted away from Habsburg Spain. So how would we not, end up carrying that out and well with such, kind of such a hardy stock? And even if you didn't grow up in New York, or you didn't, learn about New Amsterdam in school, because I certainly didn't. I grew up in Chicago, and they were like English, Puritans, Pilgrims, blah, 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 Virginia. That's it. Bye, done, and then you don't get the full story. But even if you didn't grow up here, you're touched by culture from New Amsterdam. If you've eaten a cookie, if you've sat on your stoop, if you have watched a Yankees game. The word Yankee is a combination of the two most popular Dutch men's names of the 1600s, which were Jan and Kees. Then you have been touched by New Amsterdam somehow. Last bit of homework. So this canon right here, in the movie The Admiral, which I'm going to show you a clip here in a second. This movie has to do with like the Dutch Anglo Wars from like 1660 to 1680. You really get a idea of what was going on in Amsterdam at the time. This movie is about Michiel de Ruyter, who is probably one of the best naval admirals to ever exist ever. This movie shows the Battle of the Blood. It might be one of the most insane naval battles that's ever occurred on Earth. But the detail of the ships is really the important part. The detail of their clothing, the ships, that life in Amsterdam, even the cannons. There's a cannon on this ship, and there's a small clip of it that looks exactly like the oyster pasty cannon, which means that they really valued accuracy. So warning, this is like boom, boom, fight, fight kind of battle scene. So it is a little bit loud if you have to turn down for a second. It's only about 1 minute and 20 seconds. I'm going to press it now. There it was. That's how they had the battles like that, all lined up against each other. That was like big crazy noise going on there. Excuse me. So then I'll go to my next slide. Here is my reading list. This can be sent to anyone that would like it. These are not links. I wrote this, but I can send the link to anyone. One of them is an article by Justin Rivers, talks about New York is the new orange, and I mentioned that before. That's post 1664. So a little bit of action that happened after the colony was over. The movie The Admiral, I had to purchase it for $9.99 on iTunes. I couldn't find it for free. Maybe somebody that's more techie can find it for free. And be careful, there's another movie of the same name that was made in South Korea. So make sure that you're looking for the right one. If you're looking for the Dutch version, it's called Michiel de Ruyter. And I'm gonna stop talking right now. If you want to email me questions or topics you'd like to hear in the future, I think we kind of already know the topic we'd like to hear in the future because it's all the stuff I didn't say today. But please feel free. And thank you.
Thanks, Mandy. I'm not sure if
Sorry, it was
still
long.
with us.
I am. I'm still here.
Oh, great.
Yes. I have 9 minutes before I've got to go. So.
Thanks. I'm so sorry I went over. Sometimes that's like a thing with us.
You're loving it. It's all good.
And I'll keep in mind all my things that I want to mention next time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll figure out another installment since there's much more to cover.
Yep.
From this topic. And
yeah.
Yeah,
Thank you so much. Anyone who's left anything, I really, really appreciate that. It's very, very appreciated right now.
Great. So I will quickly just talk about what's coming up for us this week, post Memorial Day. So tomorrow evening at I believe it's 7:30. I should know these things. But I'm hosting a book launch talk / party for the new book, Wild City, Brief History of New York City and 40 Animals. And actually some of what Mandy alluded to earlier about the wild natural habitat that was New York City is a real core of that book. And it's a beautiful illustrated book by Thomas Hines, who got his start writing articles about New York City animals for Untapped New York. So I'm really excited to be hosting that. And that is with Greenlight Books, also on Zoom. And then Thursday evening, we are doing a live stream of the documentary Backwater. And we just changed that to be just donation only. Everything goes to the filmmaker and the film team. But it is a hilarious and very insightful documentary of a team that went to do an expedition in New Jersey Meadowlands by canoe and what happened to them. And so it's like in the style of an Amazon expedition, but right here in the New Jersey industrial landscape. So that is going to be amazing. And you can find all those links on the Insiders events page. That's what we've got coming up. So hopefully we'll see you guys this week. Thank you, Mandy. And
thank you.
Will put together a part 2 since everyone is really excited about it. So thanks.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone. I really appreciate it.
Bye.
Bye, guys. Thanks, Mandy.
Thank you.